What happens when an ordinary plane ride turns into a public spectacle? For Barron Trump, a routine trip turned into unexpected chaos. But no one could have predicted the storm that would ensue when Melania arrived. The loudspeaker blared with the final boarding call, echoing through the bustling terminal at Dallas Love Field Airport. Barron Trump sat near gate C-12, his tall frame a stark contrast to the small chair in his seat. He kept his head down, scrolling through his phone, trying to blend in with the throng of hurried passengers. At just 17, his life was anything but ordinary. Yet he had mastered the art of blending in public. But today, that effort would be tested to the limit. A gate agent, an older man with a distinctly impatient expression, approached. Something about the teenager seemed to bother him. The agent's voice cut through the background noise. "Excuse me, young man," he said, his tone suspicious. "Are you sure you're in the right boarding group?" Barron looked up, surprised but calm. "Yes, that's me. I have a first-class ticket." His voice was firm and polite, reflecting his upbringing. The agent studied him for a moment, noting his cell phone, casual clothes, and shoes. "May I see your ticket?" Barron hesitated. It wasn't the first time he'd been questioned, but something in the man's tone seemed more aggressive. He held up his boarding pass, his name clearly visible, Barron Trump. The agent's expression changed, but he didn't back down. "Wait here," he said, and disappeared. The surrounding passengers began to murmur curiously. Barron felt heat rise to his face, but he kept his expression neutral. Moments later, the officer returned with a supervisor. "There's a problem with your ticket," the agent said firmly. "You'll have to step aside while we sort this out." Barron asked, "What's wrong?" "I bought this ticket weeks ago." The supervisor interjected, "We're working on it, sir. Please step away from the gate." As Barron reluctantly moved forward, he felt the eyes of passengers. Some began recording the interaction with their cell phones. The murmurs grew louder, and Barron's frustration grew, but he remained calm. The situation was far from calming down. In fact, it was just beginning. Barron leaned against a nearby pillar, watching the other passengers board without a hitch. The stares from the gate attendants and the murmurs from the crowd grew louder by the second. He shifted from one foot to the other, unsure of what was taking so long. Was it because of his last name? Or was there something more to it? He didn't want to jump to conclusions, but this was starting to feel personal. After several minutes, the supervisor returned, his expression still tense. "We couldn't verify your identity in the system. Do you have another form of identification?" Barron replied, "My passport is in my carry-on." "You didn't even check it." The supervisor hesitated, clearly disconcerted by the logical answer, but he didn't back down. "Sir, this isn't just about the ID. There are procedures we need to follow." "Procedures?" Barron asked, his tone calm but suspicious. "What procedures?" "I've been through this airport countless times without any problems." The gate agent interrupted. "We've had some irregularities lately. You're not being targeted, but—" The look in his eyes betrayed him. Barron was not convinced, and the surrounding passengers began to murmur among themselves. A woman in her 40s, holding a baby, said, "What's wrong? He's just a kid with a ticket. Let him board." The supervisor ignored her, focusing on Barron. "You'll have to wait here while we do another review. If you don't cooperate, we'll have to escalate the matter." "Escalating?" Barron replied, his patience wearing thin. "What exactly are you escalating?" "I haven't done anything wrong." As if by magic, 2 airport security officers appeared. Barron felt his chest tighten, not out of fear, but out of suspicion at how quickly the situation was escalating. The officers positioned themselves on either side of him, drawing even more attention. Their cell phones were out, recording every second. "Sir, please come with us," an officer said in a measured tone. "We just need to ask a few questions," Barron replied, his patience at its limit. "All good." He followed them to a small, sterile room near the gate. Inside the room, the officers asked him to sit down. The air was cold and heavy as an officer began checking his passport. "That's ridiculous," Barron muttered, shaking his head. One of the officers looked up. "We're just following protocol, son." But the word protocol was starting to sound like an excuse for something more sinister. The more they investigated, the more Barron felt the weight of an unexpected bias in the room. What he didn't know was that someone else was already on the way, and she wasn't happy. In a black SUV weaving through Dallas traffic, Melania Trump sat with her phone in hand. She had planned a quick trip to surprise her son at the airport after his flight. But as her phone buzzed with a barrage of texts and social alerts, her expression changed from calm to concern. One message caught her eye. Something is happening to Barron at the airport. People are posting videos. Her fingers flew across her phone, opening a short clip that showed Barron surrounded by security, being led out of the gate. She watched the video twice, her heart sinking with each passing second. "Driver, please hurry up," she said, her voice calm but firm. Back at the airport, Barron sat in the small room, staring at the blank wall in front of him. The officers continued to check his credentials, leaving him alone in silence. He didn't know who to call or what to do. His hands were on the table, his fingers tapping slowly, a rhythm he didn't even realize he was making. Suddenly, the door opened and the supervisor from before walked in. "We're still working on resolving the situation," he said, avoiding eye contact. "It shouldn't take much longer." "How much longer?" Barron asked, his voice steady. "You've had all my information for almost an hour." The supervisor hesitated, then went on about the procedures again before leaving again. Barron took a deep breath, running a hand through his hair. This wasn't just about a ticket or an ID. It felt like something deeper. Outside the terminal, Melania's SUV pulled up to the entrance. She stepped out, her posture commanding despite her understated dress. Heads turned as she walked through the airport, her heels clicking against the polished floor. She didn't need to announce her presence. People simply moved as she walked by. As she approached the gate where the incident had occurred, she was greeted by a forest of murmurs and stares. Passengers recognized her immediately, and some even pointed to the area where security had taken Barron. "Pardon me," she told a nearby airline employee. "Where's my son?" The employee stared, impressed by the directness of the question. "Ma'am, let me check." Melania didn't wait for an answer. She walked forward, her eyes searching for any sign of Barron. When she saw the room where he was being held, she quickened her pace. She reached the door just as the two officers returned to Barron. They stepped back when they saw her, their expressions a mixture of surprise and apprehension. "What's going on here?" Melania asked, her voice calm but charged with authority. "Mrs. Trump," an officer began hesitantly. "This is just standard protocol." "Protocol?" she interrupted, her eyes fixed. "You're keeping my son in a small room with no explanation. What kind of protocol is that?" The supervisor appeared behind her, his face glistening with sweat. "Mrs. Trump, this is all just a misunderstanding. We were trying to check your ticket." "A misunderstanding?" His voice remained calm, but his tone intensified. "Do you treat all passengers this way? Or just the ones you decide to target?" The room fell silent, the tension so thick it felt like time had stopped. Melania glanced at Barron, who was embarrassed. He stood up from his chair, his arms no longer crossed. "Mrs. Trump," the supervisor called out, beads of sweat forming on his forehead. "Please understand. We were just trying to make sure everything was in order." "This is not in order," Melania interrupted, her voice as calm as the silence in the room. "You had your ticket, your passport, and your name. What else do you need?" We caught his name in the system and it required further verification," the supervisor explained. Melania tilted her head slightly, her lips pressed into a thin line. "Caught? Because he's my son? Or because someone decided he didn't belong in first class today?" The officers exchanged uncomfortable glances, neither of them willing to answer. The tension was palpable, and everyone in the room felt it. Finally, one of the officers cleared his throat. "It's standard procedure, ma'am. We weren't aware of your relationship to him until now." Melania looked away. "So this is about your last name." The supervisor opened his mouth to protest, but she held up her hand to stop him. "Forget your excuses. I want to speak to someone in charge. Now." The man hesitated, but eventually left the room to make a phone call. Melania turned her attention back to Barron, her expression softening as she approached him. "Are you okay?" she asked calmly, placing a hand on his shoulder. Barron responded, his voice firm but still frustrated. Yeah, I'm fine. They're just wasting my time. Melania gave his shoulder a comforting squeeze before turning to the officers. Let me make something clear, she said, her voice firm and composed. You humiliated my son in front of thousands of people. This is not about protocol or procedure. This is about respect, or the lack thereof. One of the officers shifted uncomfortably. Mrs. Trump, we will do the right thing. We will make sure he gets on the next flight. You think this is about getting on the flight? She snapped, her voice rising for the first time. This is about accountability. I don't want apologies made behind closed doors. I want them made where they belong. Out there where it all began. The supervisor returned, now accompanied by a senior airport officer. The officer extended his hand, which Melania deliberately ignored. I understand there was a misunderstanding, he began. I assure you that we will investigate this incident and take appropriate action. Appropriate measures, Melania responded, raising an eyebrow. Does that include addressing the folks who escalated this for no reason? Or reviewing the video that shows exactly how it started? The officer stopped, clearly uncomfortable. We can withhold the video, ma'am. Do, she said firmly. And do it now. The room seemed to stretch as everyone waited for the officer to act. A few moments later, the supervisor returned with a computer. The video showed Barron sitting calmly at the gate before being approached by the officer. He captured the entire interaction, from the unnecessary questioning to the rising tension that led to Barron being removed. Melania watched the video in silence, her expression impassive. You gave my son a public performance, she said, her voice firm. This wasn't just a performance. It was a message that no one should endure such treatment, regardless of name or status. The supervisor, now visibly agitated, led the way back to the gate. Melania walked beside him, her strength measured and unwavering, with Barron following close behind. The tension in the terminal was almost palpable. Passengers who had witnessed the earlier commotion still stood nearby, their curiosity heightened by the return of the teenager and his mother. When they reached the gate, the supervisor stepped forward, cleared his throat, and addressed the audience. His voice wavered a little, but he persisted. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to take a moment to apologize for a situation that occurred today. A misunderstanding involving one of our passengers, which led to actions that were unnecessary and inappropriate. A murmur ran through the crowd, some passengers exchanging surprised glances and others clapping in agreement. The supervisor glanced at Melania, whose calm gaze urged him on. I want to make it clear, he said, his voice firming, that this young man did nothing wrong. This incident was entirely due to our own error, and for that we deeply apologize. The overseer paused, hands in his pockets, expression neutral. But inside, he felt the weight of the moment, not just for himself, but for everyone who had ever felt diminished in a public place. Melania stepped forward, her presence drawing the attention of everyone in the gated area. Thank you for your words, she began, her tone measured but resolute. But words are not enough. This is not just about my son. It is about every individual, about respect and dignity, no matter who they are or where they come from. The room fell silent, his words cutting through the air like a blade. My son may carry a name that attracts attention, but he is also a person, a young man who deserves to be treated fairly, just like any other passenger in this airport. The crowd erupted in applause, some passengers even standing in solidarity. The supervisor hung his head, his face red with embarrassment. For a moment, the airport vibrated with a renewed energy, not of judgment or division, but of unity. As the applause died down, a woman with a baby approached Barron and Melania. I just wanted to say I'm sorry for what you've been through, she said, alone. Thank you, that means a lot, Barron replied, grateful but still processing the whirlwind of events. But this moment of clarity wasn't the end. It was the beginning of a conversation about respect, equality, and accountability that would resonate far beyond the walls of this terminal. As the gate area began to quiet down, Barron and Melania were escorted to the VIP lounge, where they waited for their next flight. Airport staff offered them refreshments and priority seating, but Melania politely declined. For her, this wasn't about compensation. It was about principle. Barron sat down beside her, his head in his hands. "I didn't expect all this," he said quietly, breaking the silence. Melania looked down at her phone, her expression thoughtful. "You did well," she replied. "It's not easy to stay calm when things are so public." Melania sat back, crossing her arms. "And that's exactly the problem," she said. "No one should have to get used to being treated unfairly. Whether it's you, me, or someone no one recognizes, respect should never be based on a name or appearance." Barron absorbed his mother's words, thinking, "Do you think they'll change anything after this?" "I don't know," Melania replied. "But moments like this matter. People notice. And sometimes all it takes is one person standing up to make others think twice before they act." As they waited, Melania pulled out her phone and began typing. Moments later, a tweet appeared on her profile. "Today my son experienced something no one should have to go through, no matter what their name or appearance. Respect is universal. Let's do better." The post quickly gained traction, sparking online discussions about prejudice, accountability, and respect in public spaces. Barron listened to the responses, some supportive, some critical, but most echoing the sentiment that fairness and dignity should be non-negotiable. When it was finally time to board the flight, the process went smoothly. As they settled in, Melania glanced at her son, who had already put on his headphones and was staring out the window. She smiled, thinking of the bigger picture. This wasn't just about Barron. It was about everyone who had ever felt slighted, disregarded, or unappreciated. Moments like these were opportunities to teach. As the plane took off, Melania closed her eyes, her mind replaying the day's events. It hadn't been an easy experience, but it was one she hoped would have a lasting impact, not just on those involved, but on everyone who heard the story. Because sometimes the most powerful lessons come from moments of adversity, and the way we respond can inspire others to rise above prejudice and embrace friendship. If this story resonated with you, please share it with someone who might need a reminder about the importance of respect and fairness. Let's make a difference together, one conversation at a time. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more stories that inspire reflection and change.